Today we're going to make a boxed quilt sleeve that will differ from the one we did in an earlier video because the top and the bottom of the sleeve will both be hand sewn. The one we did earlier, the top was sewn into the binding as we bound the quilt, and in this case, rather than doing that, we're going to draw a line to make sure we put it on straight, and we're going to hand sew it top and bottom. And that's what we need to do with an irregular binding, because if we just sewed the sleeve into the binding with an irregular edge, the quilt would no longer hang straight. So here's my little mini, and I'm going to bind this and finish this on the blog. But just to show really quick what I did with this one, I'll re-talk about this on the blog, is I've cut this one 5.5 inches wide. This one is 6, and you'll be able to see the difference in how the two, this will be a little snugger fit. This is going to be different because we're going to go ahead and narrow hem the edges first like we did in the other video, and then we're going to sew this together down this edge at 1/4 inch. We're going to turn the whole thing, so turn the tube so it's right side out, and then we're going to press it similarly to the box sleeve I showed before. It'll be a box sleeve, but it will have no raw edges on the outside. And once we turn it, we'll re-stitch down here, which will enclose our raw edges in there so that they're not really visible here. And then we're going to hand sew both ends, and we're going to work to make sure that our top edge is straight, so that assuming that our lath is straight, the quilt will hang straight. Okay, so the way I like to do things, I like to do as much of the pressing as I can at first and then do the sewing in order. So what I'm doing here is pressing in a narrow hem on each end of the sleeve. And I've already done that end. I'm going to press this in. Okay. And then I'm going to press in kind of an offset so that these two sides are offset about 5/8 of an inch or 1/2 inch. And that's what turns this into a box. So we're going to press that all the way down to this side. So I'm going to quickly stitch these with my edge or foot, my needle kicked over to the far right, and then I'll come around to the other side. I'm going to match these two ends. I am going to backstitch. So now that we have this, we need to turn it. And you know, it's big enough you can actually just do this. But if I were making several of these, I would want to come up with a tool. And there are lots of ways you can do it, including just a regular inexpensive back scratcher. You stick this up through and stick a big safety pin. It needs to be a big one probably, through this end. And then start it going around that. You can just use this little tool to pull this through. And that, if you were doing a lot of them, would be fast and you wouldn't have to do anything too fancy. Another thing that would work, take this and stick a cone in there, in past the end, and then kind of wad this up, twist it a little, and put it in there. And then take a dowel, and you can just push this through. So if you happen to have a dowel, and empty cone from cone thread around the sewing room, you can do it this way. And I certainly recommend you do always have a collection of dowels and different kinds of tubes for turning things. Another one that works is you can take a stick that is for your wall hanging. This one is for a different wall hanging, so it's not the right length for this, but even one a little short would work. And then you want to be careful because you don't want to rip any of your fibers. You're going to do this really gently, but you can stick a big safety pin through the thick parts of your seam and through this end, and then it'll just close. And of course you want to be careful. You don't want to actually break your end of your wood, but then this can be gently used to scooch through there. And all of these methods are just intended to show you that you really don't have to use your fingers to just turn a tube this size. And it becomes trickier when you have a narrow tube, of course, but for this big one, there are lots of ways to do it. Now we've got raw edges on the inside of this, so what we're going to do is go back to the iron and press this seam nice and flat, and we'll repress in the other line that we pressed here. So here I have pressed this side and then my original crease that I pressed on the ironing board. And now I'm going to stitch that part. And I'm just going to make it a little wider than I did this seam, and I'm going to do that by moving my needle over. And then I don't have to readjust my guide. I'm going to backstitch both ends. So while this other edge is so nicely creased, and you can see that I've done my print so that you can see how straight I'm able to do all this, I'm going to stitch narrowly down this edge. I'm going to use my edger foot, and I will be backstitching on both ends. So now I have this whole edge too, and I really just do that so that when I'm sewing it, it's very easy to do it consistently. You could also achieve that by sewing really neatly with a stripe or something like that, but this just allows me to sew both ends as straight as possible. So now, centering this on the piece, I'm going to pin this down all the way across. I have blue tailor shock that will be easy to get out. You can use anything that you can get out easily without damaging your piece. It's a very busy news day in the United States, so I'm going to go and watch the news and sew this. So the first thing I did was independently sew down this edge, and once that was done, I pinned it so that the back part is completely flat. Now this sticks up because that's what creates that box, but this bottom part here is flat, and I always sew those down because once I saw someone, it's kind of tight under there, and they had their stick through the bottom and it made the front of the quilt buckle. So I always sew this down, and then I sewed down along here. Once again, I misjudged how long it would take to do this sleeve this way, and I didn't want to gloss over the details because, again, the channel is intended for people of all levels, including people that would like to try this but need really to see the details of how it all comes together. And next time I'll finish up decoratively on the front. I'm going to do 3 or 4 things to the front of the quilt, including beading, paint splattering, I think, and some satin stitching. And then the piece will be done, and I'm going to try to do that all in one video. I had initially thought that this sleeve would go super fast, and then I realized, well, I think I need to show exactly how this happens and not gloss over the details. Thanks.